Hi, everyone. I'm Rejoice on Umatta Consultant podcast today. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Anna, the founder and CEO of Poder Wealth Advisors. Before we start our conversation with Anna, I would love for Anna to introduce herself as she sees fit, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So, Anna, the mic is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rejoice. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Anajay Conte. I am the CEO and founder of Poder Wealth Advisors. It's a boutique wealth management firm based in Washington, D.C., and we specialize in working with people who are newer to wealth. So when we think about folks who have had some sort of liquidity event, let's say they sold a business or they inherited some money or they, got divorced, so on and so forth, like they just have had a really sudden wealth event and they need someone who will serve as a thought partner with them on that. Beyond that, I'm the host of the Financial Powerhouse podcast, where we talk weekly about financial topics specifically for women. I am someone who's super passionate about women and money. And so I'm super excited to be here to chat.
Awesome, awesome. All two things are amazing things to start thinking about. Or if you're already thinking about it, definitely getting more information from you. Our first question from our viewers, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your journey for becoming the founder and CEO of Poder Wealth Advisors?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in New York City. My parents are immigrants. My mom's from Puerto Rico. My dad is from the Gambia. And, I grew up without a lot of financial knowledge. Like, I grew up very much not having a lot of financial literacy, and there was a lot of financial struggle around me. And while I didn't, know about wealth management as a career path for me, I did know that I wanted to do better financially, and that was going to require me increasing my skills. Fast
Mhm.
forward, I ended up getting a job, my first job in wealth management. I worked in corporate wealth management for almost 10 years. And then I
Amazing.
left and started my own wealth management firm with the goal of working with more people like me, because I recognize that there's
Mhm.
so many folks who are first gen, or like they're the first one in their family to hit a certain economic threshold, and that comes with its own set of challenges. It comes with a lot of mindset challenges, just logistical, like understanding how things work and
Mhm.
really getting up to speed in terms of your literacy and sophistication. And so I wanted to work specifically with those types of folks.
Awesome, awesome. I love the demographics that you're describing because I've heard so many stories about people entering work for the first time and they're just
Mhm.
sort of surprised about the things that they encounter and just how to navigate. What
Yeah.
inspired you to focus specifically on closing wealth gap, particularly for women of
Yeah.
color?
Well, I think that, one of the things that I knew from my upbringing was that there wasn't anybody around me who was not smart. Like, they were all very smart, very brilliant, very hardworking, but they didn't have the access to information and
Mm,
the skill set that they needed in order to do better financially for themselves and their families. And that had a real tangible impact on, my quality of life and other people that were in my life personally. And so that was one of the reasons why I said, this is something that I can actually really help with, because for a long
right,
time, I was working with people who were already extremely wealthy,
right.
and they they were already extremely wealthy, and they didn't necessarily, yes, I could help them, but they didn't necessarily need my specific skill set. And
Mm,
because they didn't need my specific skill set, that I felt as if it was going to waste, right? What the people that
gotcha.
really needed it were the people who could understand, like, what is it like to be first generation? What is it like to have to worry about your parents' finances? What is it like to have to, build wealth from scratch for
Right.
yourself, and to really like build that stability for yourself? So that was what really made me want to focus on that, because I knew I could add so much value, since that was my own lived experience.
Exactly, exactly. It makes it more personalized too. I think
Exactly,
it's easier for
exactly.
you and how you did it, which is
For sure.
amazing. What personal and going along that, what personal
Mhm.
experiences have shaped your approach to financial empowerment and building wealth?
Um, I think personally, one of the things that I recognized was, when you are starting from scratch, there's a tendency to overdo things one way or another.
Mm,
So there's a tendency to, live more lavishly and have more experiences or more things because
mhm.
you may have experienced a lot of deprivation as a younger person. Or there's on the flip side, which is what I experienced, there was a tendency to oversave and overinvest and to be a lot more financially conservative than I probably should have been for a long time. And
Mm,
that has, in both experiencing like being really restrictive and seeing how that was not really great for me, but then also, seeing other peers that I knew that had done well in terms of their career, but didn't have much to show for it in terms of wealth because they went the other spectrum. Witnessing that, and I'll share a personal story. My aunt, so my mom is one of two sisters. My aunt was the oldest. She was really, they grew up very poor, and like she was very determined that she was not going to experience that poverty ever again.
okay.
And so she was extremely frugal. Extremely,
Wow.
extremely frugal. And then she passed away very suddenly, like at 70.
Okay.
And she had left so many things. Like she would tell me so many things that she wanted to do with her life, and she never did any of them. And they
Oh
were
boy.
all very reasonable. They weren't lavish, extravagant things, but
Right.
she never allowed herself to do that. And that was really a lesson to me. That was what woke me up, actually, to be frank, about my oversaving and overinvesting.
Okay.
Was I recognized that she just died and she had all of these things that she
Right.
really wanted to do, and she didn't get to have those experiences. And I didn't want to have that same thing happen to me. And so that pushed me to have a lot more of a measured approach in terms of wealth. And that's how I advise my clients is we need to grow your wealth, we need to
Right.
protect your wealth, and we also need to make sure that we're enjoying it as well.
Exactly. I love that advice. Having a clear medium so you can sort of
Yes.
live in the moment, not tomorrow, not 10 years, because who knows if
For
10 years is there.
sure. But then also taking care of your future self, right? Like, because
Right.
people tease like millennials for being very YOLO and just wanting to live and not really thinking about the consequences. And I think that there's a healthy balance. And what it really comes down to is being very intentional about the things that you actually want to spend money on. Okay.
Is it
So, like for me, it's not that I'm going to have a life that looks exactly like what social media looks like. It's
right?
not actually. My life is going to look a lot different. And that's okay. That's
Right.
totally fine. That's totally great. And it allows me the freedom to say, I'm going to really prioritize my fun money, and I'm going to carve
Mhm.
that out, and I'm going to spend it on the things that matter to me. And then the rest is what's going to be for my financial future.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for that advice.
Mhm.
For our next question, what are some of the biggest challenges women of color face when
Mm.
they've accumulated wealth and trying to think about financial independence?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things I see women do wrong is they spend a lot of time focusing on not making mistakes, and they end up being very conservative when it
Mm,
comes to their finances, and it's to their detriment, right? And there's a sweet spot, just like with anything, where with your personal finances, you have to take risk, right? They say no
right.
risk, no reward. You have to take risk, and you have to be willing to take action probably a little bit sooner than you feel comfortable. And
Mm,
that's a little bit of the challenge, and like the give and pull is a lot of women want to have all of the information, and they want to make sure
right.
that they know exactly what's going on, and they want to read everything to and spend tons of time doing research. And the challenge is if you don't get yourself off of that research train or that information gathering train, then you also are putting yourself at a disadvantage. The other I would just say is there's reality. Like we live in
Right.
reality. I'm a very realistic person. And so the truth is, a lot of us are underpaid. Like we talk about the wealth gap, the income gap, that is very real. And so, oftentimes we're earning less,
Right.
and we don't have an inheritance, or we don't have financial support, and in fact we may be providing financial support to others. And so when you
Mm,
compound all of that together, the stakes feel a lot higher. And so I find also that like women of color, they oftentimes are really conservative and really worried about losses, and they spend too much time in that information gathering phase because they want to make sure that they are not losing what little headway that they've been able to gather.
Right. And I'm so thankful that you took us there, because for myself, sometimes just the amount of information you find on social media or maybe
Hmm.
anywhere that you get your information, it could be extremely overwhelming. The
Yeah.
amount of you have to read and dissect
Yeah.
it and try to figure out which one is actually the correct information based on what you're trying to find. So that's
For
super helpful.
sure. It's really hard. And I would say, even as a financial advisor, sometimes I see things on social media. I'm like, is that true? Like, I don't, because I don't pretend that I know everything, right? Like, I'm not a
Right.
CPA. I don't know every nuance of the tax code, but I
Right.
hear things. And the challenge with that is it sensationalizes a lot of financial things. Like I saw something the other day and it was about how you could write off your wedding as a tax deduction. And I'm like, listen, I don't need to be a CPA to know that that's probably not legitimate, and you're
Right.
probably going to get investigated or audited by the IRS for doing that kind of stuff. Like
That's
let's
quite
let's
creative.
not let's not listen to everything that we hear on social media because it's not all real.
Exactly, exactly. That's quite creative, though. I actually never
I
thought about it.
mean, because truly, like, is it a business? I
It's
mean,
not.
it's
Yeah.
not a business. It is a part of your life. And, one of the biggest mistakes I see people doing too is like trying to get real fancy. They try to get real
Right.
fancy before they've done the basics. And,
Yeah.
that is a recipe that's like putting the cart before the horse.
Exactly. Exactly. So, what kind of key strategies you recommend for women of color based on what we're hearing from you today to build
Yeah.
and sustain wealth?
I mean, I think there's two things, like, and these are really boring and basic, but I would say one of the biggest keys to building wealth as a first time wealth builder is to ensure that you are really protecting, being extremely protective of like your excess cash flow. So making sure that you are dedicating a percentage of your income that is going to be invested for your future, and building your life around that. Because a lot of times
Mm,
what people do is they say, oh, here's my life, here's my income, here's my lifestyle, or like the expenses and the bills that I have, and then
mhm,
I'll save and invest the rest. And
mhm.
that's actually, this is along the lines of the pay yourself first
Right.
mentality, where you really need to put that on the flip side, and you need to
Mhm,
say,
mhm.
hey, what are the things that I'm building towards? Like, what's that specific financial goal that I have? And then backing into what is the percentage of my income that I need to invest and save on an ongoing basis in order to make sure that I am meeting that financial goal, and being incredibly protective of that. Because if you're making a decision that is not going to allow you to be protective of that, to protect that and make sure that it is wholly untouched and never gets messed with, that, like, that's just the number one thing you have to do. And then I would say secondarily is to recognize that it's a long game. I
Right.
know that for a lot of us, I had this issue too where I felt like I was so far behind everybody. And the truth was
Mm,
I was behind everybody, right? But we had different starting points.
right.
And what I think we can do is we try to overdo it. We try to sometimes be a little too aggressive with things before we
Mm,
have um, mastered the foundations of it, which is that positive cash flow, ensuring that you have adequate protection like insurance, emergency fund, those kind of things. Then you can start to get a little bit more fancy once you've built the habits of saving and investing consistently. Then you can get a
exactly.
little bit more fancy, but you can't do that stuff before. It's like sequencing matters a lot when we talk
Mm.
about your financial life. And that's something that I don't think we talk about enough online.
I love that. I love that. And it sounds like everyone is in different journeys or different point in their
Yes.
life. They have to think these things through very well. I wonder the people who sort of accelerates, right? They just think maybe if I do this, I can jump to the next level without
Yeah.
maybe a couple of months in that journey. You
I
know,
mean, listen, it's I'm not going to sit here and say that nobody's ever been successful at that.
Right.
But if I look at the people that are the most financially successful that I've met professionally, they are people that have a very long term view on what
Mm,
they're doing, whether that be building a business or on investing or, whatever it is. They have a very long-term view, and they're willing to hold space for that view and to hold on
mm,
to that long-term view and that vision for a very long time. And so they're not getting distracted by chasing money. You can make money anywhere.
right.
Investing, business, you can always make money. There's always a way to make money, but is it consistent with what you're good at, your
Mm,
bandwidth and your time and your long-term vision? So one of my coaches talks about this in terms of business, and I think it's helpful when we think about investing is, and our personal finances, says like your business is like an oyster. So in this case, your finances are like an oyster. Okay.
yeah,
So you are the actual oyster, like the living thing inside the shell. And your time and your energy and your attention is the shell. And
right.
the amount of energy and attention that you have is going to determine how big that pearl gets,
Mm,
how big that pearl inside is going to get. And if you are someone that does not have the bandwidth
right,
available to trade and watch the market and so on and so forth, like don't try and do it. If you're not somebody who
right.
doesn't have the bandwidth or the skill set to be a landlord or to be a short-term rental owner, like if you don't have, or to fix and flip, right, like then maybe that's not what you need to do. And it's
Right.
really important that we have that long-term view, but we also are rooted in reality of who we are, what we have time for, and maybe the season that we're in life as well.
I love that. I love that. Self-discovery, right?
Yeah, exactly. Self-awareness is super important because that
Very.
also just tells you what you're shooting for. A lot of times people are growing wealth and building wealth, and they have this idea of, then they'll just be able to do what they want, and that'll feel great. But the problem is sometimes the acute, once you've gotten out of like the scarcity and the immediate
Mm,
pain, the how would you say it, like the future goal or the urgency and the commitment starts to wane. And
mm,
that's also part of the problem too. Like
that's
we
true.
have to know what we're shooting for and have a lot of commitment to it in order to have the resiliency that we need to be able to achieve that goal long term.
Awesome. Awesome. How do you see women of color playing a pivotal role in closing the wealth gap?
Mm. um well, I think, studies have shown that we are some of the most educated groups, and we're starting businesses at an exponential rate. And so I think, so many studies have shown that people who start businesses, like business owners, generally speaking, are wealthier than employees. And it's not
Right.
to say that you can only get wealthy by being an employee, business owner, because that's not the case. But generally speaking, they are. And so if you think about, if women of color are starting businesses at a disproportionately higher rate
Right.
than other populations, that's a really golden opportunity for us to make up for a lot of lost time and really catch up in a way that we may not have been able to do otherwise.
Very true. Very true. And I'm also wondering, going along with what you mentioned, what advice would you give to women of color aspiring to maybe go in a different direction as opposed to owning a business, but to
Mm.
enter the financial industry itself?
Um, I mean, I think you can always, there's a dearth of advisors, diverse advisors out there. And so I think, start with your first job and get into it through that. There's so many opportunities and ways to do it. And the industry seems to be really interested in bringing on more advisors of color and more diverse people from diverse backgrounds. And so I think it's just about continue. Getting a foot in the door, seeing if it's what works for you, and continuing to build your career that way. I mean, it's a wonderful career. I love it very much. It's loads of fun.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm sure you're rethinking about yourself back in the days when you first joined the industry.
Yeah.
Any tips for folks in terms of what you learned,
Mm,
what to do, what not to do?
um, I would say don't focus so much on trying to be like others and
Mhm.
focus on, if you are not of a similar background to others in our industry. I made that mistake a lot. Most of the advisors that I saw were multi-generational wealthy, and they had country club memberships, and they were just very in a different economic bracket than what I
Mhm.
had come from. And so I felt a lot of insecurity around that. And I didn't let that stop me though,
Okay.
which I think sometimes we can be intimidated by that. So I would just encourage anybody who's just getting started to recognize that they still have a ton of value to provide, whether or not they come from a similar background as the others in their office, in their company, in their field.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne, for your time today, speaking with us and
My
sharing so
pleasure.
many valuable insights into building wealth and closing the wealth gap. At this time, do you have any final words, and where can people find you or
Yeah.
connect with you? What
Yeah,
platform?
so one thing I would say is I think for anybody who is building wealth for themselves and is really focused on changing their family's financial trajectory, like one of the key things you're going to have to do is get the sequencing right and make sure that you are not sitting on the sidelines too long. So I actually have a resource that I would love to offer to anybody who's listening to this. If you find me on Instagram at ANNANJIEKONTE, and you just send me the word like grow, I will send you a resource, totally free resource that's going to help you like start to put more money to work and get out of overanalysis paralysis.
Amazing. Amazing. I'll be the first one to send you
Okay, love it. I love it.
a connection. Thank you so much. And we appreciate all the information, and we will look forward to connecting with
Pleasure.
you on Instagram.
Awesome. It's so great connecting. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.